Dallas, 1958. A secretary finishes typing a business letter on bank letterhead, and at the bottom she types a company name out of habit. Not the bank's name, her own. She's fired the same day. $300 a month, no other income, a kid at home, and she just lost that job over a typing mistake. Here's the part that makes it almost too neat. The company whose name she typed by accident sold a liquid that covers up typing mistakes. 17 years later, her own husband and her own board of directors would go to war with her over the recipe for that liquid. A recipe she mixed in a kitchen blender. Her name was Bette Nesmith. She'd walked into Texas Bank and Trust in 1951 as secretary to the chairman of the board. Her mother taught her to paint, and she thought of herself as an artist her whole life. She ended up at a typewriter because she had no choice. Married at 17, husband shipped out to the war, baby born while he was gone. He came home and the marriage fell apart. She'd already dropped out of high school and was finishing her diploma at night. She was, at best, a mediocre typist. And then the bank bought new IBM Electrics, fast, clean, beautiful. With one catch. The ribbon wasn't cloth anymore, it was carbon film, and the ink sat on the paper like it was welded there. So grab an eraser, right? Nope. The eraser smeared the letter into a gray bruise and chewed up the fibers of the page. Hold it to the light and you could see everything. One slip on the last line meant retyping the whole page, carbon copies and all. Typing pools sat inside every bank and every insurance office in the country. Electric machines were selling by the hundreds of thousands, and every single typist was losing the same fight every day. Around the holidays, the bank hired painters to decorate the ground floor windows. Bette did design work on the side, so she wasn't watching them like a tourist. She was watching them work. A painter who slips off a letter doesn't scrub anything out. He waits for it to dry and paints right over it. At home, she mixed water-based tempera in her kitchen blender and tinted it to match the bank's stationery. Poured it into a washed-out nail polish bottle. Dropped a fine brush in her purse and took the whole thing to work. Paint over the letter. Wait. Type the right one on top. Her boss never noticed a thing, which honestly was the test result. For about 2 years she used it in secret. She was embarrassed about the mistakes, so she kept the bottle in a drawer and touched up pages when nobody was looking. Then a secretary down the hall spotted it and asked for her own. Bette found a green bottle at home, wrote 2 words on the label by hand, "Mistake out," and handed it over. Within a month, every typist in the building wanted one, and the idea of actually selling it. By her own telling, that wasn't even hers. An office supply dealer saw a bottle and asked her why she wasn't putting it on the market. Up to that moment, she said, she thought of it as her own private fix, nothing more. By 1956, it was a home operation. She cooked batches in the kitchen. Her son and his friends filled bottles and slapped on labels out in the garage. The son's name was Michael. Hang on to that. He comes back at the end of this in a way you will not see coming. Now, the product itself was rough. The early mix dried slowly, went on uneven, and you could still read the error underneath. Fixing it took 3 people: Bette, a high school chemistry teacher, and a guy she knew from a paint company. A few versions later, she had a fluid that dried fast and vanished under a lamp. That's what she took to IBM in 1957. The logic was airtight. They sell the typewriters, so they should sell the cure for the typewriters. She mailed 2 typed documents to IBM's ad agency, one with the errors erased, one with the errors painted out. She included a note saying the old way of fixing mistakes was finished. IBM passed. She said later that she felt completely powerless and she had no idea how she was supposed to carry this thing by herself. The trade press is what saved her. In 1958, a short write-up in a magazine for secretaries described the product, now renamed liquid paper, and called it the answer to a typist's prayers. Roughly 500 orders landed at her home address from all over the United States. Her first big corporate customer showed up right behind them. General Electric ordered more than 400 bottles in 3 colors. That was 4 times her entire monthly output. Same year, she filed for a patent and a trademark. And that is also the year she typed the wrong company name on that bank letterhead. Now, the versions here don't fully line up. The Typo story is the one her biographers tell, and she never pushed back on it. The Texas State Historical Record is drier about it. The bank got tired of a secretary who was spending half the workday on her own business. Same year either way. Same result either way. And judging by how fast she went full-time on her own company, getting fired mostly just settled the question. It did not, however, launch a rocket. By 1960, the company was spending more than it made. She drove around Texas with samples, hauled product to San Antonio and Houston, and wrote letters to buyers at night. No investors, no expansion loan. Every dollar of growth came out of bottles sold. Her first office was a shed. After that, a regular house. What kept her going was stubbornness and the faith she'd taken up back in 1942. Her line about persistence was basically this: you either have it or you don't, and it comes from wanting the thing badly enough. By 1964, weekly output went from 500 bottles to 5,000. By 1967, she was past $1 million in sales. In 1968, she sold 1 million bottles in a single year and built an automated plant. IBM, by the way, had turned into one of her bulk buyers by then. In 1969, she put up the building that corporate culture textbooks still point at: on-site daycare at the factory, a library and a credit union for employees, a green space with a pond in the yard. The place was made accessible for employees in wheelchairs 21 years before this country passed its disability rights law. It's tempting to read the daycare as a memory of her own $300 months with a kid at home, though she never explained it that way herself. Her company policy statement said in plain language that product quality mattered more than profit, and she deliberately pushed decisions down the ladder. Around then, the former typist started driving a Rolls-Royce, which is, honestly, the only flashy thing in her entire biography. Everything up to here is the story of an invention. Everything after this is the story of people trying to take an invention away from the person who made it. That's the kind of turn we pull apart on this channel all the time, so stick around. By 1975, the numbers looked like this: 25 million bottles a year. A line pushing out roughly 500 bottles a minute. Sales in 31 countries. Plants in Canada and Belgium. Net profit the following year came in at $1.5 million. Competitors like Whiteout had already shown up, and she still owned the market. That same year, her second marriage blew apart. She'd met Robert Graham in 1962, frozen food salesman. He married her, worked his way into the business, then onto the board. The divorce was ugly. Betty had already given up the chairman's seat by that point, and the man sitting in it now was her ex-husband. So he pulled a group of executives around him, and the woman who invented the whole thing was locked out of the building. Her words: she wasn't allowed on the property, and employees weren't allowed to deal with her. At a company with a statement about human dignity hanging on the wall. Then they went after the formula. And this wasn't a dumb move, it was a sharp one. The recipe was held as a trade secret, and her royalties were tied to that specific recipe. Change the composition, declare it a different product, and technically there's nothing left to pay her for. she'd keep her shares and lose the money on every bottle sold. It also showed exactly where the value of that company actually sat. Not in the plant, not in the Belgian factory, but in something a woman stirred together in her kitchen 20 years earlier. Otherwise, nobody fights over a recipe. What saved her was the ownership structure. The company had grown with no outside money, no venture capital, no slice sold off to fund the plant. There was nobody to dilute her and nothing to dilute her with. She still held 49%, and that vote didn't go anywhere. Her health was bad by then. She took the company back anyway. In 1979, Bette sold liquid paper to Gillette, $47.5 million, plus a royalty on every bottle sold through the year 2000. The fight with her ex-husband ended on its own. There was nothing left to fight over. She'd already started moving money out. In 1976, she set up a foundation in her own name for women in business. And in 1978, a second one for women in the arts. Less than a year after the sale, her life ended. She was 56. The estate, over $25 million, was split down the middle. Half to the foundations, half to her son, the kid from the garage. By then, Michael Nesmith was known across the country as the guitarist in the Monkees, a band assembled for a TV show that, at its peak, was outselling almost every act alive. So the funny part is this: the son got famous on television and the real family money came from other people's typos. Those royalty checks kept landing until 2000. That year, the brand got sold on again to Newell Rubbermaid, and the payments stopped right around the time the typewriter era did. What she regretted, going by her own words later, wasn't the money and wasn't the lawsuit. She regretted giving up the chairman's seat at all. The money came back, the rules didn't. The daycare, the library, decisions made from the bottom up, quality over profit, all of it went out the door with her. And I still can't decide what her actual mistake was. Letting her husband onto the board or handing him the chair and settling for being a large shareholder. Tell me which one you'd pick in the comments. And if you're into stories where the inventor and the invention end up on opposite sides of the table, subscribe because we've got plenty of those.